She actually looked at me and said, "You really think I'm deleting my dating apps just because we're together?" She said it so calmly that I thought I'd misheard her. No anger, no sarcasm, just calm. The kind of calm that hurts more than shouting ever could. The glow from her phone lit up half of her face, soft, cold light brushing across her cheekbones as she scrolled through Hinge. Her thumb moved slowly, almost absent-mindedly, like it was muscle memory by now. She paused on a profile, smiled faintly, a small, private smile that didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't even know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask why. The other part, the quieter one, already knew the answer, and it scared me. Finally, I asked, "Are you serious right now?" She didn't look up. "Don't overreact," she said, still scrolling. "I don't talk to anyone. I just like seeing who still likes me. It's just a little validation." That word validation. It sounded harmless, but it landed like a weight on my chest. I kept staring at her phone screen, at those tiny faces flickering by. Validation, was that all love meant now? A handful of strangers reminding her she still mattered. I didn't reply, not because I agreed, but because I realized something deep down had just cracked. Quietly, the room fell into that heavy kind of silence. You can feel pressing against your skin. The TV was still playing some sitcom rerun. Laugh tracks echoing through a room where no one was laughing. She curled her legs up on the couch, phone in hand. The blue light spilling over her like a blanket. I sat there beside her, close enough to feel the warmth from her body, but it felt like miles between us. Her world was lit up by notifications, messages, little hearts, and likes from people I'd never meet. Mine was just ... still. A few months ago, she'd laughed when I got jealous over some guy commenting under her photo. She'd said, "Don't you trust me?" And I'd smiled, pulled her close, told her, "Of course I do." Back then, I meant it. I really did. But now, watching her eyes fixed on her phone, half smiling at something I couldn't see, I felt like a stranger in my own relationship. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt me. Maybe she just needed to feel noticed again. But the truth is, in trying to be seen by everyone else, she made me feel invisible. The sun had gone down by the time she finally put her phone away. The city lights outside our apartment window flickered faintly, reflecting in the glass behind her. She leaned back, relaxed, like nothing had happened, and I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the echo of that one sentence that I couldn't get out of my head. "You really think I'm deleting my dating apps just because we're together?" That night, we sat on the same couch, watching the same show. But I've never felt further from her than I did right then. My name's Logan. I'm 27, living in Boston. I work in marketing, one of those jobs where every day feels like a meeting that could have been an email. My life before Brianna was quiet, predictable, work, gym, takeout, Netflix, sleep. A rhythm so steady it almost felt like silence. Then Brianna came along, and suddenly everything had color again. She was 26, a creative designer for a downtown agency, the kind of woman who walked into a room and people just noticed, not because she tried, but because she carried herself like she knew who she was. We met at a digital media workshop on a random Thursday. The afternoon sun came through the tall glass windows, and I remember she turned around, smiled, and asked, "Hey, do you know any good coffee spots around here?" That was it. That's how it started, a question about coffee. We went for one right after class, and somehow that coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into talking until the cafe closed. After that, there were late-night texts, long calls, weekend trips, and before I knew it, my quiet little life wasn't so quiet anymore. Brianna had this way of talking that made you want to listen. She could make a conversation about fonts sound fascinating. She laughed easily, dreamed big, and believed life was supposed to be beautiful, even on ordinary days. And for a while, she made mine exactly that. A year later, we moved in together, a small apartment near the Charles River, on the 4th floor of an old brick building. It had creaky wooden floors, sunlight that poured in every morning, and a tiny balcony where she planted lavender that never quite survived the Boston cold. But we loved that place. We'd cook together, argue about dishes, make up with kisses. She'd forget her coffee mug on the counter every morning, and I'd always leave my shoes right by the door. Small things, little imperfections that somehow made it feel like home. I remember winter nights when snow piled up outside, and we'd wrap ourselves in a blanket, drink hot cocoa, and watch movies we'd already seen a dozen times. She'd lean her head on my shoulder and ask softly, "Do you think we'll last?" And I'd say, "Yeah, you're it for me." And back then, I meant every word. But time has a way of changing people slowly. Her job got busier. Late nights at the office turned into working weekends. Her phone buzzed constantly, work emails, group chats, Instagram notifications. I told myself it was fine, that she was just ambitious. That's one of the things I loved about her. But slowly I started to realize it wasn't just ambition keeping her distracted. It was something else. The laughter faded, the conversations got shorter, and the glow on her face came more from her phone screen than from anything between us. She'd smile while texting someone, the corners of her lips curving in that soft, familiar way. And for the first time, I wondered who was on the other side of that smile. If you asked me when things started to change, I'd tell you it was that night, the night she said she just needed validation. The night I saw the reflection of her phone's light on her face and realized, sometimes the cracks in love only show when the light hits them just right. The signs didn't come all at once. They showed up quietly in little moments that I almost convinced myself didn't mean anything. Her phone started staying face down on the table. She laughed at things she didn't share with me, and sometimes I'd hear her chuckle softly from the other room, that low, private kind of laugh that used to be meant for me. When I asked, "What's funny?" she'd shrug and say, "Just something from work." Her voice always sounded casual, too casual. But silence has a sound of its own, and between us, that silence was getting louder. I started noticing other things. She no longer left her phone charging by the bed. It stayed in her bag. She'd check her screen while stirring a pot of soup, smiling at messages she never mentioned. Sometimes she looked happy, happier than she'd been with me in weeks. I tried not to think about it, tried not to make stories out of small things. But once doubt takes root, it doesn't stop growing. It spreads quietly, like cracks under glass. One night I came home earlier than usual. It was raining, the kind of cold Boston drizzle that makes the whole city blur. When I opened the door, the apartment was half dark, just one lamp on in the kitchen. And there she was. Brianna sat on the couch, wearing a beige sweater, her hair tied up, one earbud in, scrolling through her phone. She didn't see me right away. Her face was lit by the screen, and she was smiling. That soft, unguarded smile that once used to belong to me. For a moment, I just stood there in the doorway, watching her, watching that tiny glow on her face, realizing how far away she already was. When she finally noticed me, she jumped slightly, just for a second, then smiled. "Oh hey, you're home early." "Yeah," I said, hanging up my coat. "Rain got the shoot cancelled." "Ah," she nodded, locking her phone a little too fast. "Want me to warm up some dinner?" Her tone was warm, normal to normal. We ate quietly. She talked about her new project, her co-workers, how her boss kept asking for last-minute changes. I nodded, smiled, pretended to listen, but I couldn't stop seeing that image of her laughing at her phone. After dinner, she went to bed early. I stayed in the living room. Her phone was right there on the coffee table, close enough to reach. One swipe, one code, and I'd know everything. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew that if I needed proof, then maybe the trust was already gone. So I sat there, listening to the rain tapping against the window, the hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of my own heartbeat, steady but hollow, trying to convince myself that love was still enough. The next morning, she woke up early. I heard the shower running, smelled the coffee brewing. She always made 2 cups, one for her, one for me, even when she barely touched hers anymore. When she came out, she looked radiant, polished, like nothing was wrong. She leaned down, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll be home late tonight, don't wait up." It was such a simple sentence, so casual, but somehow it cut deep, because it wasn't the coldness that hurt. It was the normalcy, the way everything looked fine on the surface, while something inside me was quietly collapsing. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove around the city, past the coffee shop where we met, past the bridge where she kissed me for the first time, past every street that used to feel like hours. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like it, and I realized something. I didn't know how to fix what hadn't officially broken yet. When I finally walked in, the apartment was dark. Her shoes were by the door, the charger still plugged in. Her phone screen lit up for a second, a new notification. A soft glow in the dark, then faded. I stood there, staring at that tiny light, and for a moment, it felt like the heartbeat of something that was dying, but didn't know it yet. And that's when it hit me. We hadn't broken up, but love had already started to leave. She stood there, silent, her hands intertwined tightly, as if she herself was trying to hold onto something slipping out of reach. The yellow light from the hallway fell across her face, cutting it in half, half in light, half in shadow, exactly like the feeling I had, both understanding and unwilling to understand. The room was completely still, only the ticking of the clock breaking the silence. I could hear my own breathing, the sound of the sofa fabric as I unconsciously clenched my hands. And then she spoke. "I need someone to remind me who I am." A short, soft sentence, like a breath, yet to me, it felt as heavy as a stone falling straight to the bottom of my heart. I looked up at her, the woman who had once been my everything, and suddenly realized that perhaps I had not truly seen her for a long time. I had thought I understood her, but in truth, I only understood the part I wanted to understand. When she spoke about pressures at work, I would just nod. When she wanted to go for a walk at night, I was busy answering emails. And she, perhaps, still smiled, still gentle, but little by little had withdrawn herself from our life, silently, patiently, and unnoticed. And now, when she said she needed someone to remind her who she is, I understood. Not because she wanted to betray me, but because I had made her feel invisible in her own home. I wanted to react, to say that she was wrong, that she had hurt me. But in that moment, the words crumbled in my throat. I realized there are things that cannot be saved with words, because the words that needed to be heard no longer had anyone willing to listen. Her eyes met mine, moist, sorrowful, yet no longer evasive. There was no fear or regret in them, only a strange calm, like someone who has accepted an ending after days of silently struggling. I felt like I was sitting in front of a stranger, though it was still that face, that voice, that scent of perfume. I felt the distance was no longer just a few steps, but a whole stretch that could never be crossed, and I knew clearly, decisively, that this love, though it had not exploded in anger or tears, had reached the point of no return. It did not break in a shout, but dissolved in silence. In that half-light, half-shadow room, I felt everything changing color. The chair we once shared, the coffee cup, the photo on the shelf, all still there, but their meaning had vanished, as if the world kept turning while we stood still, quietly watching something within ourselves closing. And I understood, sometimes, people don't leave because they stop loving. They leave because they can no longer see themselves in the eyes of the one who stays. She stood there, silent, her hands intertwined tightly, as if she herself was trying to hold on to something slipping out of reach. The yellow light from the hallway fell across her face, cutting it in half, half in light, half in shadow, exactly like the feeling I had, both understanding and unwilling to understand. The room was completely still, only the ticking of the clock breaking the silence. I could hear my own breathing, the sound of the sofa fabric as I unconsciously clenched my hands. And then she spoke. I need someone to remind me who I am. A short, soft sentence, like a breath, yet to me, it felt as heavy as a stone falling straight to the bottom of my heart. I looked up at her, the woman who had once been my everything, and suddenly realized that perhaps I had not truly seen her for a long time. I had thought I understood her, but in truth, I only understood the part I wanted to understand. When she spoke about pressures at work, I would just nod. When she wanted to go for a walk at night, I was busy answering emails, and she, perhaps, still smiled, still gentle, but little by little had withdrawn herself from our life, silently, patiently, and unnoticed. And now, when she said she needed someone to remind her who she is, I understood. Not because she wanted to betray me, but because I had made her feel invisible in her own home. I wanted to react, to say that she was wrong, that she had hurt me. But in that moment, the words crumbled in my throat. I realized there are things that cannot be saved with words, because the words that needed to be heard no longer had anyone willing to listen. Her eyes met mine, moist, sorrowful, yet no longer evasive. There was no fear or regret in them, only a strange calm, like someone who has accepted an ending after days of silently struggling. I felt like I was sitting in front of a stranger, though it was still that face, that voice, that scent of perfume. I felt the distance was no longer just a few steps, but a whole stretch that could never be crossed, and I knew clearly, decisively, that this love, though it had not exploded in anger or tears, had reached the point of no return. It did not break in a shout, but dissolved in silence. In that half-light, half-shadow room, I felt everything changing color. The chair we once shared, the coffee cup, the photo on the shelf, all still there, but their meaning had vanished, as if the world kept turning while we stood still, quietly watching something within ourselves closing. And I understood, sometimes people don't leave because they stop loving. They leave because they can no longer see themselves in the eyes of the one who stays. After that moment, the room remained silent, but it was no longer the emptiness from before. Instead, it was a heavy stillness, making me aware of every breath, every small gesture, as if each one carried unbearable weight. I watched her standing there, hands still intertwined, eyes fixed on me, and in that gaze I saw both tenderness, exhaustion, and an unspoken farewell. I wanted to speak, to say something, to hold on, to ask her to stay a little longer, but this time, I knew that any words would be meaningless against the truth that was already clear. She did not blame me, nor was she upset. She simply sighed quietly, as if both of us understood that it was time to face reality. Finally, she nodded gently, a small yet meaningful gesture, as if confirming that we both understood each other. Do you understand? Her voice was gentle, weary, a question and a farewell at the same time. I nodded, without responding with words, because even words could not keep her here. Her eyes looked at me, full of compassion but also emptiness, making me realize that sometimes the greatest distance isn't physical, it's the gap in the soul, where one can no longer see themselves reflected in the other's eyes. She turned and walked toward the door, each step light, as if not wanting to hurt me further, but determined, reminding herself that it was time to let go. I watched her figure gradually disappear into the yellow hallway light, each step stretching out, reminding me that some things in life cannot return, no matter how much the heart wants them to. When the door closed behind her, the room grew cold. Not because she had left, but because the emptiness she left behind was too vast to fill. I sat down, staring at the empty chair, the coffee cup on the table, the old photo on the shelf. Everything remained, but its meaning had changed. I realized that love doesn't always end with arguments, tears, or betrayal. Sometimes it ends with silence, with invisible distances, where people still love, but can no longer see themselves in each other's eyes. I sat quietly, letting all the emotions flow. I recalled her laughter, the nights we walked together, the seemingly ordinary moments that held a whole world I had never truly noticed. Each memory pierced my heart, gently sweet, yet painful, but I knew I had to endure it, to learn to let go. And in that moment, I understood the most important thing. Letting go does not mean failure. It is recognizing the value of each moment we shared, loving without possession, and sometimes, to let someone find themselves again, you have to give them freedom. I exhaled deeply, letting the silence embrace the room, allowing the memories of us to exist and fade at the same time. In my heart, love remained, but it was no longer about possession, no longer about control. It was acceptance, giving her the space she needed to find herself. And I knew that both of us would continue on separate paths, carrying memories, carrying love, but never again as us. I realized that sometimes loving someone is not about keeping them beside you, but about learning to let them go, then learning to live with what they left behind in your heart. The room still felt slightly cold, but it was no longer the emptiness from the moment she left. Only I remained, along with memories that seemed to dance in the soft yellow light. I sat quietly, looking at the familiar objects, the chair, the coffee cup, the old photo, and realized that everything was still there, but their meaning had changed. They no longer belonged to us. They had become marks of what had passed. I recalled her smile, the evenings we walked together, the stories she shared that I had once listened to only half-heartedly. Now, every small detail became proof that I had not truly listened, had not truly seen her. And in that silence, I learned something. Sometimes love is not lost. It is misdirected, hidden beneath carelessness, busyness, and seemingly ordinary habits. I told myself, not everyone leaves because they stop loving. They leave because they can no longer see themselves in the eyes of the other. And letting go does not mean failure. It is maturity. It is learning to love without possession. It is accepting that sometimes the person you love needs to find themselves again. Looking out the window, the sunset stretched across the familiar street. Everything continued to move. Life does not pause because love has ended. I knew I had to move forward to carrying memories, carrying lessons, carrying love, but no longer as a burden. I smiled faintly, a smile both sad and light, feeling for the first time in months that I could truly breathe. There was still emptiness in my heart, but it was a space that could be filled with myself, with the days ahead, with people and things I had never truly noticed. And I realized the greatest message from this story. True love is not possession or clinging, but seeing each other, valuing each other, and, when necessary, knowing when to let go so both can be free. I stood up and stepped outside, taking a deep breath. Out there, the world was still bright, full of opportunities, new paths, and I realized that I had not lost everything. I was simply learning to love properly, and to live more fully, and in my heart, I knew, even though we were no longer us, that love still lived on, no longer belonging to either of us, but as a part of both. A lesson for us to carry forward in our own lives.